Now I want to introduce our first featured reader, and just to check, Vicky, is it correct that you'd like to go first?
Yes, please. Yes, yes, I
Yes,
would.
then I'll get my notes to make sure you get a proper introduction. So, ladies and gentlemen, Vicki Feaver is our first featured poet, and Vicki Feaver grew up in Nottingham. She began to write poetry in her late 30s when the last of her four children began school. She worked as a lecturer in English and creative writing at the West Sussex Institute, later the University of Chichester. I practiced pronouncing that place name, becoming emeritus professor. She is the author of four poetry collections: Close Relatives by Sacker in 1981, The Handless Maiden by Cape in 1994, winner of a Heinemann Award and shortlisted for the Whitbread Prize, The Book of Blood, Cape 2006, shortlisted for the Forward Prize and Costa Prize, and I Want, Cape 2019, shortlisted for the Forward Prize. The Handless Maiden includes the poems Lily Pond, a finalist in the Arvon Foundation International Poetry Competition, and Judith, winner of the Forward Prize for Best Single Poem. In 1993, she was awarded a Hawthornden Fellowship, and in 1999, a Tom Mondely Award. Her work has been included in several contemporary poetry anthologies, including Penguin Modern Poets #2, with Carol Ann Duffy and Evan Bolland, I hope I pronounced that name right, after Ovid in 1996, an anthology of translations of Ovid's Metamorphoses, and the Penguin Book of Poetry from Britain and Ireland since 1945, which was published in 1989. No, 1989?
I don't know.
No. Vicki Feaver now lives in Scotland. And I always reflect a little bit on a poet's work. And in your work, I found a line I thought that described the whole of your poetry so well. And it was the line, "But I like wounded things," from the poem Boy with a Knife. Um, and to me, your poetry invites us into a world of fairy tales and myth, be it biblical or otherwise. And there's a grimness there that often goes along with these tales. And these poems, to me, seemed like anecdotes, but ones that carry a heavy load in the sense that there's always something more, something that goes unsaid but casts its presence over the poem, like in a poem about the slow picking. And I saw someone describe your poetry as domestic Gothic, which to me seems like a wonderful label to have on your work. And I would say that your poetry celebrates the beauty of the wounded thing. And I also always ask a question of the featured poets to answer and to give us a little bit of insight in who you are and what your work is like. And as I said in the beginning of our meeting, this Sunday in the Netherlands, we celebrate Saint Nicholas, which is sort of a kind of Santa Claus, but different. And one of the traditions is that we make surprises for our family and poets and poems with a little bit about their quirks. So I wanted to work off a little bit of this word surprise in the spirit of Saint Nicholas. And my question for you is, how has poetry surprised you?
Well, the thing is, when I was a child, I really wanted to be a poet. But actually, it just seemed much too difficult. I think when I studied poetry at school, Wordsworth, Coleridge, it just seemed too difficult, and I didn't imagine that I ever could write poetry at all. So when in my sort of middle 30s, I began to try and write poems, and then I went to a workshop, and I actually began to write poems that were published, which was amazing, and that was an incredible surprise to me. And I think, still after I always think I'll never write another poem. So when I do, an idea comes to me and I do write a poem, and they don't always work out. But when a poem works out, it is both a gift and a surprise. It's amazing.
Well, that's a wonderful answer, and I can really relate to what you're saying. And it's a wonderful way to celebrate the miracle of poetry by having each poem being, well, a surprise and a miracle. Well, thank you so much. I'd love to invite you to take us into your poems, please.
Yes, I'm going to read two poems from each of my collections, beginning with The Handless Maiden. In the 17th century, there were many poems where women were compared to flowers, beautiful and silent, and also very short-lived. So they better give away their virginity pretty quickly, or else they'd just be on the rubbish heap. And I had a partner who, when I wanted to talk about something, he always handed me a bunch of flowers to shut me up. So, and that led me to write this poem, Marigolds. Marigolds, not the flowers men give women, delicately scented freesias, stiff red roses, carnations, the shades of bridesmaids' dresses, almost sapless flowers, drying and fading, but flowers that wilt as soon as their stems are cut, leaves blackening as if blighted by the enzymes in our breath, rotting to a slime we have to scour from the rims of vases. Flowers that burst from tight, explosive buds, rayed like the sun that lit the path up the Thracian mountain, that we wound into our hair, stamped on in ecstatic dance, that remind us we are killers, can tear the heads of men's shoulders. Flowers we still bring secretly and shamefully into the house, stroking our arms and breasts and legs with their hot orange fringes, the smell of arousal. This is a quieter poem. It's called Ironing. This poem is based on a poem by the 17th century poet George Herbert. And he wrote a poem called The Flower, in which the flower is a metaphor for his spiritual death and then rebirth and recovery and rebirth. And I chose the same pattern, but my metaphor is ironing. I used to iron everything, my iron flying over sheets and towels, like a sledge chased by wolves over snow. The flecks twisting and crinking until the sheath frayed, exposing wires like nerves. I stood like a horse with a smoking hoof, inviting anyone who dared to lie on my silver-padded board, to be pressed to the thinness of dolls cut from paper. I'd have commandeered a crane if I could, got the welders at Jarrow to heat me an iron the size of a tug to flatten the house. Then for years I ironed nothing. I converted to crumpledness. I put the iron in a high cupboard. I converted to crumpledness. And now I iron again, shaking dark spots of water onto wrinkled silk, nosing into sleeves, round buttons, breathing the sweet heated smell, hot metal drawers from newly washed cloth, until my blouse dries to a shining creaseless blue, an airy shape with room to push my arms, breasts, lungs, heart into. Two poems from the Book of Blood next. There's a toad on the cover, and that's the poem I'm going to read. The Latin name for a common toad is Buffo buffo, which is the name of the poem. Clown's name for the creature in my cellar. I give him gladly the one room I don't want. Sodden cardboard, wet dark, the gluey varnish of slugs. What he eats, dollops of glassy yellow-grey meat, host of scavenging mites, the only things down here to move fast. He creeps over the floor's uneven brick, as if movement is painful, or crouches still under the drip from a leaking pipe, moist and glistening, pumping himself to bursting. It's spring, when toads smell their way to water, and the female spawn is strung in necklaces of black-eyed beads. But he's my prisoner, soft, warty stone, who at night swells to the size of a man. And the next poem is The Gun. When I moved to Scotland, my husband bought a gun. And I still remember it on the kitchen table. And I said, get it out of here. I don't want a gun in the house. But anyway, you'll see in the poem, I sort of gradually grew accustomed to the gun and even quite pleased about it. The gun. Bringing a gun into a house changes it. You lay it on the kitchen table, stretched out like something dead itself, the grainy, polished wood stock jutting over the edge, the long metal barrel casting a grey shadow on the green checked cloth. At first, it's just practice, perforating tins dangling on orange string from trees in the garden. Then a rabbit shot clean through the head. Soon the fridge fills with creatures that have run and flown. Your hands reek of gun oil and entrails. You trample fur and feathers. There's a spring in your step. Your eyes gleam like when sex was fresh. A gun brings a house alive. I join in the cooking, jointing and slicing, stirring and tasting, excited as if the king of death had arrived to feast, stalking out of winter woods, his black mouth sprouting golden crocuses. Now, I want. I really lovely illustration. I don't think you can probably see it, but on the cover, there's an illustration by William Blake. And it's of a little boy with a ladder up against the moon. And underneath the caption is, I want, I want. He's got one foot at the bottom of it. Carol Ann Duffy wrote a poem, edited an anthology of poems for the Queen's Jubilee year. And she gave poets, she gave out these years to poets. So you couldn't choose your year, you just got given one. And I got given 1974. So I had to think a long way back. And this is what I wrote. The year Anne Sexton sat in her red cougar with a glass of vodka behind the closed doors of her garage and drifted off to its purring lullaby in her mother's fur coat. The year I read Emily Dickinson, This is the Hour of Lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow, first chill, then stupor, then the letting go. What do you do? A man asked me at a party. What do you do in the afternoons? I was 31, the same age as Plath when she turned on the gas. I'm a poet, I lied, jolting myself to life, a woman buried under ice with words burning inside. I went to Crete on a wildflower hunting holiday. And in a little modern art gallery in, I think it was Ios Nicholas, it was the main town in Crete. There was an exhibition, and one of the exhibits was a installation by, help, I've forgotten her name. This is what happens to me. By this American artist. And it was of hands washing parts of a skeleton. So there were little windows, video windows of these hands. And when I was driving in the coach to these sites where the wildflowers were, I thought of this woman washing these bones, and this poem came out of it. I called it The Surgeon's Widow. She dug all night in the company of moths, drawn from the dark to the bright beam of her torch, recovering first his skull, last the phalanges of his toes. Finally, at dawn, her bag full, she carried her husband home. She laid his bones, damp and cold from the grave, on a rug by the fire, then found a drill, pliers, and a coil of wire. Aided by the diagrams in his anatomy books, she reassembled his gaunt frame. The night of their wedding, he'd swung her off her feet, waltzing her from room to room before carrying her up to bed. Now she held him and danced the same route, stumbling, almost falling on the stairs. Once they'd made love in the bath. Now, lifting him gently into the tub, she washed him like a muddy child, scrubbing with a nail brush at green and amber stains on his porous bones. His hands she left till last, soaping fingers famous for their delicate skill with her fingers, crooked and clumsy with arthritis. Finally, rinsing off grey suds, she dried him with a warm towel. She slept as before his death, his knees slotted into the crook of her knees, her buttocks cradled by his pelvis, her head on the pillow beside his, dreaming of his breath on her neck. Have I got time for one more? Okay, so I'll read. I was, last year, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I wrote this poem about it, which is an ode to Parkinson's. I think it's self-explanatory, really. You began as my enemy, slowing my steps, shaking my left arm and leg, scaring me with what you'd do next. I once banished a burglar by rushing downstairs, shrieking like a maenad, but we were locked together in a wobbly dance. The more frantic I got, the more I juddered like a wind-up doll or jiggling puppet. We got on best when I took the lead, moving my body with sudden speed, exaggerated slowness, or intentional force. The same with my mind. Free to roam, it raced towards catastrophe. I had to retrain it to see you as a friend. You were in me for years, but waited to show until my mind and body were in danger of settling into old age stupor. You jolted me awake, challenging me to live every minute left to me, to burst into flower like a desert cactus.
Thank you so much. I'm blown away by the diversity of your subject matter. I mean, I think this is the first time I've heard a poem about ironing and an ode to Parkinson in one reading, and there's a gun in there as well. So thank you so much.